Hello, and welcome to this week's podcast, More Than My Life, More Than Myself. To breed or not to breed is the question Dr. Phil recently asked America. But I think it's more important to ask this question to ourselves than it is to ask it of society. It is true that Western countries are facing a depopulation bomb. They are not having enough children to even replace the people in their societies. This means their societies will collapse, or they will be forced to allow even higher levels of immigration. And along with that, health problems from the third world, crime problems from the third world, social thinking from the third world, and for all practical purposes, we will cease to be the West anymore. I acknowledge that this is important, but I think each individual child is more important. I do not think we are being honest about the unhealthy ways we are encouraging the present generation to think about the decision to have children. There are far too many people who think of a baby as a fashion accessory or an emotional support animal. But I still think that most people understand that having a baby should be based on more than your own loneliness or a baby's cuteness. Even so, I do not think we are having honest discussions about things that should be considered on behalf of that future child before making an irreversible decision to bring them into the world. I intend to change that today. So let's start at the beginning. Gen Xer Bridget Fedesi sparked controversy for writing "I Regret Being a Slut" a while back. And now she's in trouble again for writing "Divorce is Forever." She didn't and doesn't advocate that anyone should stay in a physically or verbally abusive situation. But in her article, she points out that the stats on the consequences of divorce on kids are clear, and that they are not as resilient as we've been told. Stats show us that 70% of the people in prison come from broken families. Kids from broken homes are 50% more likely to have health problems. They are twice as likely to do drugs, twice as likely to drop out of school, and they are twice as likely to commit suicide. They are 4 times as likely to have difficulty fitting in, and they are 3 times as likely to end up needing therapy. Her argument is simply that if the only problem between the parents is that the heat is gone, or they've grown apart, or one of the other common no-fault divorce reasons that couples often cite, and you are able to live together peacefully, then it might be worth riding it out for a few years until the kids are grown. Quote, "It's tough because everyone's going to tell themselves that they needed to get divorced. So my whole point of my piece was just don't lie to yourself that it's going to be very hard for your kids, and it's never going to end." She had nothing to say to couples who don't have any children to consider, who want to divorce for no-fault reasons. Her focus was on weighing things out when children are involved. And my focus is on weighing things out before children become involved. Gen X were the children of divorce. The boomers have the highest divorce rates of any generation, so Gen X was the generation where it was the most common to have their parents drag them through messy divorces. Some people can manage to have a truly amicable divorce, but let's be honest, that is definitely the exception, not the rule. Most of the time, there are a lot of feelings of animosity involved, and it usually gets ugly. For Gen X, it got very ugly. That was an era where kids had to testify in court against one parent or the other. And, of course, the stats consistently show that the risks of a child being abused, be it physically, verbally, or sexually, by the romantic partner of one of their biological parents as they start dating again is exponentially higher than they are when living with both of their biological parents. The stats on that are simply conclusive. Also, the entire family fragments as the time spent with parents has to be divvied up and rationed out. You no longer spend vacations or holidays together. Even grandparents, aunts and uncles, cousins, and time with other extended family members becomes significantly less. In a system whose focus incorrectly is on trying to be the most fair to each of the parents, kids are really getting the raw end of the deal in the current arrangements. In some cases, kids have to uproot their lives every week and swap houses. Some kids even regularly have to swap schools. This also leaves the kid without any context in their home life, which is meant to be the most secure refuge of their world. Unlike other kids, they didn't see their parents that morning and know their plans. They didn't see them last night and know what happened at work or in their social life that is affecting their mood. Children from broken homes haven't seen them for a week or more and are being dropped into the middle of an ongoing life to sink or swim as best they can manage. And this trauma just repeats as they are regularly ping-ponged between worlds. Every time they settle in, the ground shifts again. Is it any wonder we see anxiety skyrocketing among young people? Even parents who are really trying to keep their kids from feeling put in the middle of the adult issues will often not do a very good job of hiding their jealousies about the time that the child just spent with the other parent, or their jealousies over new romantic partners, etc. Or the kid ends up being made to feel like the third wheel in their parents' new relationships, sometimes even in their own home. All these various consequences just keep falling like dominoes. Bridget is a child of divorce herself, and so is her husband. This means that their child doesn't have 2 sets of grandparents, they have 4. So they get even less quality time with each grandma or grandpa, and are constantly having to divide up their family time for holidays and visits. Most kids know what it's like to not have one parent or grandparent come to a school play because they can't handle being around their ex, who will also be there. When there's bad relationships with a step-parent, as is not uncommon, the step-parent often becomes the gatekeeper of the parent-child relationship, causing the child to be cut off from their biological parent. There are some children of divorce who don't even know where their biological parent is buried because their step-parent has weaponized that information and not allowed them to be involved. All this gets multiplied even further when there are step-siblings and half-siblings, especially if those marriages don't work out either and the child finds themselves cut off even further from even more relationships. There is a newer trend among divorced parents known as nesting, so that the kids don't have to live out of a suitcase. They stay in the same house and the parents move in and out on a weekly basis. This at least allows the child to stay in their familiar surroundings, but it doesn't fix the issue of trying to get a read on the parent that they are not living with on a daily basis, or of having their entire family structure break down into ever more complicated fragments. Then there is the parent trap situation, which is not as uncommon as you might think, where divorced parents get back together. Usually, the kids feel pretty resentful about this. By this point, they're usually grown and feel like, so you destroyed my childhood, and now that I'm finally old enough to limit its impact on me, now you choose to get back together? After all the damage is done. There was a lot of blowback over Bridget's article after a lot of initial praise from people who said that they cried while reading it. Many said that it represented what had happened to them and that they had just never known how to express what they went through before this. But that, of course, was followed by people who said that this article didn't represent their personal experience and that they even had a wonderful, loving step-parent. And that truly is wonderful, that they were the exception to the rule. But that doesn't change what the stats say the rule is for most people. Bridget pointed out that although this argument of "that wasn't my experience" is a common response to every topic on the internet, it is also a very narcissistic response, as if to say, "This piece wasn't written specifically about me. How dare you?" Most of the blowback had to do with creating justifications. People who had chosen to divorce, especially those who had gotten divorced for a less substantial reason rather than abuse of some kind, naturally feel the need to justify what they did when confronted with an article that points out the ongoing effects that such a choice had on their children. This is a natural human response. But it is not a very mature one. And it is definitely a self-focused one. Though again, it's entirely instinctive and therefore somewhat understandable. Did they have reasons for doing what they did? Probably. Were they, quote, good enough reasons to justify the damage it did to their children? Sometimes. But either way, the fact remains that damage was done. And we should be able to have an unemotional discussion about that damage without one side being accusatory or the other side being defensive. Then there's the flip side of the story where people left. The story where people, especially women, stayed in a relationship through severe problems and sometimes even when they shouldn't have. Many women have the instinct to, as one of my favorite podcasters, Chris Williamson, put it, do the William Wallace thing, to put on the blue face paint and stand there facing down the problem, yelling, "Hold! Hold!" But setting aside cases where they needed to leave and should have, there are cases where even infidelity was survived and the couple was eventually glad that they stayed together and worked it out. But it was very hard at the time. But it was very hard at the time, and it was not a short climb to get back to a good place. Then you can always circle back around to the issue of the decreasing birth rates everywhere in the Western world. This is not due to the fact that mothers are having fewer children. It is due to the fact that fewer women are becoming mothers. Women who have children are still more likely to have more than one. But overall, fewer women are having any children in the first place. And the West is facing a depopulation bomb. In fact, the rate of motherhood is going down faster than the rate of marriage. So there are less people getting married, but even fewer people, married or otherwise, becoming parents. So there is this new group of married people who are childless by choice. Those who do have children tend to have 2 or 3 or even 4, but it's not enough to make up the difference when so many people are not having any children at all. South Korea is the most shocking example of this. Their depopulation bomb is a nuclear one that is set to go off soon. Their society has so few children that if their trajectory continues in the direction that it's going right now, for every 100 people in their country today, they will have only 4 great-grandchildren between them. South Koreans are going extinct. As Bridget pointed out, most of the blowback she received online is simply projection. Someone feels a sense of guilt based on what they read, and because they are beating themselves up, they assume that the author must have written what they wrote to specifically attack them. And therefore, they feel the need to defend themselves, which usually involves more than just defending themselves. It usually involves attacking the person that they perceive as attacking them. This really gets compounded if they are the type of person who fears that if they admit that they're wrong on one thing, they might have to question everything. That actually should be an exciting thing, to question everything and learn and form new opinions. or at least have the chance to form deeper, more examined opinions to shape your life in the best way you can. But for a lot of people, it's scary. Of course, even a good thing can be taken too far, and you can become so open-minded that your brain falls out, and you are convinced that nothing can be known, no matter how much time is devoted to learning about it or how simple it was to begin with. Life is all about balance. The extremes of anything are usually unhealthy. More is not always better. In fact, it rarely is. Never underestimate your ability as a clever human being to lie to yourself so that you can believe what you want to believe. All of us outsmart ourselves all the time. And if you're someone who is always questioning yourself anyway, who is never really certain about things, even when you have acquired a very high knowledgeability on the subject, it can be easy to assume that others have that same standard and to mistake their certainty for them having real knowledge. The truth is, they may simply be spouting off about something that they know absolutely nothing about, however much certainty they are projecting. You don't know something's a cope until it's no longer a cope, Bridget pointed out. In August of 2023, she pushed back against the sexual revolution based on its results in her own life. She had been a liberal who had, quote, reclaimed the word slut and wore it with pride. She wanted to be a boss bitch, sleep her way to feeling empowered, etc. Only when she found herself in a real and loving relationship did she look back and realize how unhappy she had been in the life that she was encouraged to embrace out of some duty to her fellow feminists. She had the same experience all over again when she became a mother for the first time at the age of 43. Everything she had said and honestly thought she believed about being free and how great it was, she now looks back on and says that was a coping mechanism. The reality is that the future you has to live with your decisions for a lot longer than the present you gets to enjoy the moment. There is some argument to be made for the you regret the things you didn't do more than the things you did do approach. But on the other hand, there is a lot of evidence to the contrary. Because we live in a culture that encourages everyone to be shameless, regret is considered a dirty word. You're not supposed to regret anything. The problem is, whether you're supposed to or not, we do. But if the people who are giving you the bad advice in the first place can make you feel ashamed about feeling ashamed, then they never get the backlash they deserve when their bad advice blows up your life. It's insanely hard for any of us to face the damage we've done to ourselves and to others, and the advice givers are banking on that. Maybe some will even grow so determined not to face what they're feeling that they will become just like the advice givers and actually encourage others to pursue a life that has made them miserable and that they simply don't want to admit made them miserable. After all, misery does love company, especially compared to the alternative of feeling like the only one who screwed up their life. Women, as a whole, some are exceptions, but as a whole, are mostly unable to admit that anything they do would ever have possibly been wrong or a bad decision. To admit that is not only to humiliate yourself, but to, quote, betray the sisterhood. They are taught that anything they do, as long as they are a woman when they did it, somehow qualifies as female empowerment, even if it is to the detriment of other women. Cardi B's WAP would be a perfect example of this. In this, quote, song, she encourages young women to sell their bodies for college tuition money as she writhes around on the floor like a, what shall we say, professional. If a man told a woman to say those things and behave in that way in a video, he would rightly be treated like Jeffrey Epstein, and the whole world would condemn him as a misogynistic pig who was objectifying women. But if a woman does it, it's automatically female empowerment. Now, either it's wrong to sexually objectify women, in which case it doesn't matter if it's a man or a woman doing it, it is wrong, or it isn't. Just because a woman is the one doing the objectifying does not make it female empowerment to do it. If a woman beat her child, rather than a man being the abuser, that doesn't make child beating female empowerment. But younger women have been raised to believe that if anyone criticizes any woman for any reason, it can never be valid. It is anti-feminist of them to have any criticism at all, no matter what. That has not created a healthy generation of young women. It has created a lot of narcissists. Melissa Kearney, author of The Two-Parent Privilege, recently exposed, purely from a statistical viewpoint, the consequences to the children of divorce. There are, admittedly, circumstances where staying would be even worse. And there are circumstances where you might be able to avoid or at least diminish some of these pitfalls. But it is important for us to discuss what they are in order to weigh that information into the balance when making a decision to get a divorce. And also, if you must still go down that path, you will have the information so that you can do so with your eyes open so that you can minimize the consequences as best you can. Only 63% of children in the United States are raised in a home with both of their married biological parents. 130 nations were surveyed, and America had the highest percentage of single parents at 23%. The United Kingdom is a close second at 21%, but nowhere else do the numbers even approach that. The average percentage is less than a third of our numbers at around 7%. This decline over the past 4 decades in the number of children growing up in a two-parent home is definitely happening along class lines. This decline is not represented in the college-educated class. It is happening in the middle class. Here, the rates for kids living with just one of their parents shot up by almost 20%. This started in the 60s and 70s when there was a push to accept rather than to stigmatize single mothers, which was good. But it was taken too far into normalizing it and even celebrating single motherhood. Immediately after this, we saw a drop in the rates of marriage among young people from all economic walks of life. Then, in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, the decline leveled off for the college-educated class while continuing to plummet for the middle class. There were also economic factors that impacted the earning capacity of men without college degrees at this time, making them less attractive as marriage partners. At the same time, women were being encouraged to remain single and pursue their careers, and if they had children, it was equally acceptable to raise them outside of marriage. So what we saw was a decrease in marriage, an increase in the number of kids born outside of marriage, and an increase in the number of children being raised in single-parent homes. Now we are in a vicious cycle. It is a two-pronged cycle. First, the parents who found themselves in this group are passing on this way of thinking about becoming single parents to their children who are raised in it. But also, they are passing on the economic consequences to their children, which greatly increase the chances of them ending up in the same position themselves. This economic disadvantage is both the cause and the effect of the breakdown of the family. If a man without a college degree has a child and doesn't stick around or is not living in the home with them, then, especially if this child is a boy, the cycle repeats. Statistics show that boys raised in a home without their father are more likely to act up in school, therefore less likely to go to college, more likely to get involved in crime, especially while they are young, all of which makes them less attractive as marriage partners, and therefore less likely to father children in a two-parent home, and the cycle repeats. This breakdown to the family also leads to identity politics, because people need a sense of belonging to a group, and if they don't get that from a strong and stable family, they look for it elsewhere. Some children turn to gangs. Other young adults turn to social groups, and most bizarrely of all, we are seeing people whose entire sense of self centers around their political identity. As Mary Eberstad posited in her book, Primal Screams. Kids who grow up in a single-mother home in the USA are 5 times more likely to live in poverty than they are in a two-parent home. Kids growing up in a single-father home are 3 times more likely to live in poverty. Kids growing up in a home with only one parent live in a home where the income is, predictably, about half of the average income for kids in a two-parent home. The household income determines the neighborhoods they live in, and therefore the schools they go to, and the extracurricular activities they can afford to participate in, so on. These kids are less likely to graduate high school, more likely to be involved in crime, and thus be involved in the criminal justice system. They're more likely to have an early pregnancy. They are less likely to earn a high income as an adult or get married. All of this is just the statistical realities of the financial implications of single-parent homes. This is before you even get into the psychological and emotional downsides. Teachers have always been able to identify the kids growing up in a single-parent home. The ones who were acting up, who were unprepared for class, who didn't have their homework done, who were a little less cared for than the other kids, all came from homes where they were being raised by a single parent. Usually that single mother was working multiple jobs, exhausted, struggling to pay for the basic necessities of life, without much time left over for things like helping with homework, disciplining, or actively parenting, and the children basically had to raise themselves and each other. This reality is not a secret to teachers who see it all the time, nor is the predictions for the path ahead for these troubled kids. Melissa says that one of the reasons why bringing up the reality of these statistics is considered taboo is that there is a visceral reaction to the belief that the implications of these statistics blame single mothers. But the reality is, no one is blaming single mothers. What they do is incredibly hard, and they are usually the only good and loving influence in their child's life. But we do need to be honest that those considering being single mothers or putting themselves at high risk for becoming single mothers, addressing the idea that they may have that it is no big deal for them or the child, honestly telling them that this is going to be incredibly hard, is something we need to do. Lying about that reality only puts more women and their children in this very difficult cycle. That is not helping anybody. In fact, Melissa's publishers wanted to call the book The One-Parent Problem. She refused because she did not want to make it sound like the single parent was the problem, when in fact, most of them are doing all they can do to give their children the most that is possible to the very best of their abilities, and they're having to do that alone. They are often the best thing that their child has going for them. We can acknowledge that and be empathetic for their struggle, while also acknowledging that despite their heroic efforts in doing it alone, that having to do it alone does result in gaps that should be considered. So she called the book The Two-Parent Privilege in order to acknowledge the privilege that a couple has in having help from a partner to raise their child, and also the privileges that the child has as a result of growing up in a two-parent home. Also, it is mostly the upper class, the group with the most privileges overall in terms of finances and education and opportunities, who are the most likely to have this privilege. Feminists had a visceral reaction to the reality that these statistics exposed because they felt Melissa was claiming that a woman couldn't do this without a man's help. They felt she was saying that a woman can't do this just as well on her own. The reality is, no one can do this just as well on their own, male or female, as someone who doesn't have to do it alone. Two heads are better than one. Two incomes are better than one. Two people to share the load are better than one. This is not an insult. This is just mathematics. Rather than worrying about whether this cycle of poverty might reflect badly on claims that feminists would like to be true, why don't we acknowledge that the poverty needs to be addressed more than the feminists need a success story to repeat? There is also a very uncomfortable racial element to these statistics. When Daniel Patrick Moynihan first drew attention to the sudden rise in black children being born to single mothers in 1968, there was a huge backlash, which has cast a blanket of silence over the issue ever since. The reality is that to acknowledge these stats is not being racist. On the contrary, it is addressing a very real struggle faced by members of the black community. It is part of a cycle that contributes to the disproportionate levels of violence and incarceration and the lower chances of getting out and succeeding and getting a higher education. We can't help anyone or figure out any solutions if we can't even say that there is a problem connected to a specific thing, the breakdown of the family. Black children would benefit from getting to have more two-parent homes. Black mothers would benefit from having the help of a partner, so the burden wasn't all on them. And many black men would like to be a bigger positive influence in their children's lives. And as we have recently begun to see the same things happen in the Hispanic community among its non-college educated class, it is growing clear that this is less of a racial issue than it is a class issue. The 2019 census revealed that this isn't happening in the Asian community. 88%, 9 out of 10 children whose mothers identify as Asian in the census were living in two-parent households. Among children whose mothers identified as white, 77%, or 3/4 of them, were living in two-parent households. 64%, or 2/3, of children whose mothers are Hispanic live in two-parent homes. And 38%, 2/5 of children whose mothers identify as black live in two-parent homes. Most Americans are aware of the academic achievements of Asian children, so much so that they were being discriminated against by the college admissions system in the Ivy Leagues, which is what caused affirmative action to be overthrown by the courts. We might want to consider how the 50% difference in the numbers of two-parent households for Asian children and black children plays into this, and what can be done to help bridge the gap. Another interesting thing is that, with the exception of Asian families, there is a divide within these racial groups. Asian children tend to have high rates of two-parent households, whether their parents are college educated or not. But among Hispanics, blacks, and whites, the numbers vary drastically, depending on whether the parents are college educated or not. Among black mothers that have a 4-year college degree, 60% of their children are living in married two-parent homes, as opposed to 38%, if you don't break the stats down within races. And since that 38% includes the college-educated parents, that means the numbers would be even worse than 38% among the rest of the community. We need to stop being so fearful as a society that we prevent ourselves from discovering solutions. We have to be able to talk about all the facets of these problems in order to make progress and truly help people. Or we are never going to solve these problems. In which case, why talk about them at all? They will continue to get worse. The gaps will continue to get bigger with each cycle of the generations. We should continue to talk about the things we have been, what schools can do, making sure meals are provided in case kids aren't getting enough to eat at home, providing after-school programs and counselors, but we should also start talking about what we can do to help strengthen families, since that plays such a big part in a child's chances at success in life. The disadvantages only multiply during the teen years. A single mother raising a boy will hit a point in his teens where he is an unreasonable, hormonal young male who is too big for her to control. At that point, he will do what he wants to do, and depending on how determined he is, she will not be able to stop him. He will predictably go looking for a father figure at this age. And if he is in a neighborhood or community where most of the children are, like him, fatherless, then he is very likely to end up in some sort of gang, or at the very least, hanging out with a group of kids that are a bad influence and are going to get him into trouble. Melissa worked with single mothers as an intern at a welfare-to-work center when she was going to college. Here, she talked to single mothers her own age and even worked with single mothers who told her that their son was about to enter high school, where they knew he would have no choice but to join a gang for survival. Discussing these harsh realities is not about condemning people and saying, "You're bad," or pointing fingers. It's about acknowledging that this is a bad situation for everyone, especially the kids. And doing so with the goal of trying to figure out the most effective ways to help end these cycles of poverty and violence and hopeless outcomes. Melissa wants to make this a non-taboo subject, to talk about it in a way we talk about any other subject, just the facts and the statistics, while coming at it with empathy and not being judgmental. But let's bring these unsayable things into the conversation. One former teacher got a visit from a high school boy who had been expelled, who had once been his student when he was in elementary school. The boy was now part of a gang and was upset about having to start at a new school. His former teacher tried to encourage him that perhaps this was an opportunity to start over with a clean slate, unaware of the realities being faced by kids like this. The boy told him that the reason he couldn't go to that school was because rival gang members went there and they would murder him if he did. He and his siblings were being raised by a single mother who I'm sure was doing the best she could. But how many of these cases might be preventable if this subject was no longer taboo to talk about? If not that case, at least others where people thought that being a single parent was basically just as good for a kid. Some groups are trying to talk about this and do some good. There are responsible fatherhood groups trying to teach fathers living in a separate home how to be more engaged in their children's lives. But even here, there are roadblocks. Instincts would tell you to encourage them to go to their children's sporting events and parent-teacher conferences, get more involved. But many of them have criminal records, including drug charges, and are not allowed near schools. It's the cycles that must be broken to have any hope. Which is why as many people as possible need to be talking about this, so that as many ideas can be thrown out there as possible, and we have the best chance of doing something positive. And of course, there is a difference between a child whose parents are working and have no criminal records but are separated or divorced versus a child growing up in the circumstances that I just described. But most children growing up in a single-parent home are going to be disadvantaged in a variety of ways, just some even more than others. And economic impacts are not the whole picture. Even though we saw these trends of single parents start rising when a decrease in the availability of manufacturing jobs caused men to be less valued as marital partners due to the decrease in their earning potential, when one looks at the local fracking booms of the 2000s, which increased earning potential among the same group of men, we saw a rise in employment. We saw a rise in income. But there was absolutely no decrease in the number of children born to single parents. Births went up among married and unmarried people alike, because they felt they could better afford to have a child. Interestingly, in the 70s and 80s, there was a similar boom as the 2000s fracking boom. When it came to coal, male earnings went up, marriage rates went up, and birth rates went up, but only among married couples. And the number of single-parent births actually went down. If people got pregnant, they could afford to get married and did. Since the communities were very similar and the circumstances were very similar, the only thing that seems to be different is what was considered the social norm at the time. Back then, the social norm, if you could afford to take the next step in life, was to get married and have kids. Today, the social norm, if you can afford to take the next step in life, is to have a kid and maybe get married or maybe not, which is part of why we need to be talking about this. Would people be making the same decisions if they knew that their kid would have serious disadvantages if they end up being raised in a single-parent home? And if they didn't want their child to have these disadvantages, and they're not sure if they want to be tied to this particular partner, might they not wait to have a child until they've made more stable plans? And wouldn't that be a better reality, both for them and the potential children? Having children is not a decision one should make apathetically. The idea of doing it on your own shouldn't be one that you enter into thinking that it doesn't really make a big difference, that it will be possible for you to give yourself and your child the life you would have been able to if you weren't having to do it on your own. Just look at the animal kingdom. Most animals require both parents to raise the young as a team. In instances where one of the parents is killed, it is possible, but much less likely that the surviving parent can manage to raise their offspring to adulthood alone without the young dying or being killed. There are many reasons why college-educated parents have better rates of staying together. It's not because they're just better people who don't get on each other's nerves as often as everybody else does. They have higher incomes and therefore don't stress as much about money. And money is one factor that is a major contention point among couples. They can also afford to get couples counseling or marriage counseling when they have problems. But it is also much more common among these college-educated couples for them to have the attitude that you stay together for the kids because that's how they themselves were raised. And that is how the people in their social groups were raised. It's ironic that these same people who are so determined to give their kids the benefits of a two-parent home are often the ones who find the whole subject most taboo. It is the epitome of luxury beliefs. But this taboo is actually adding to inequality among groups and is bad for children everywhere, no matter the group they come from. For those of you who may not be familiar with the term, luxury beliefs is a term used to describe people among the elite who have a belief that they come up with that sounds virtuous to them, and therefore they pass it on to lower classes, the middle class and the working class of people, saying this is the good way to be a good person, except that belief system that they came up with, although it has no bad effects for them in the elite, it has horrible effects for the lower classes, but they won't quit pushing it anyway. One example would be like when feminists decided to have men stop opening doors or pulling out a chair for a woman. That was fine among the elites to say, you know, I'm a woman, I'm fully capable of opening my own door and pulling out my own chair. I don't need a man to do it for me. But that's because most of the men that the elite women were dating were from, you know, the J.J. Astor class, the Titanic elites, who were being raised in homes where they did not witness, for the most part, there were some exceptions, but for the most part, did not witness their father strike their mother or become physically abusive. But women in the lower classes were physically abused. And having a man be taught to treat a woman a certain way, to respect her, to open doors for her, to pull out chairs for her, also was a barrier to the instinct to hit her or treat her abusively. And so a luxury belief would be like where the elite women said, well, we don't want man pulling out chairs for us. We're big girls. We can do it all on our own, despite the fact that getting rid of that social norm hurt women that were in the lower classes because men were more likely to abuse a woman if they did not have social norms around them that said, you treat a woman with respect. That's what luxury beliefs are. Something that sounds nice when you have the luxury of living above the consequences of it. These people with a lot of luxury beliefs tend to have a problem with having any social norms. I'm not proposing a society that goes around shaming single parents. I'm talking about a society where the social norm accepts that it's a basic fact that a two-parent household is beneficial to a child and should be what is aimed for because of that, whenever possible. Some progressives claim that they don't want any social norms because they don't want people to feel restricted in their personal freedom, which having social norms does. But many of these very people would have no problem saying that a deadbeat father has a responsibility to stick around and provide for the child he has created. That is a social norm. Accepting that this is the right thing to do, to stick around for your child, be responsible. And it's a social norm that limits his personal freedom. So what is the difference? And I'm not picking on men here. Melissa told the story about a single father she knew with 3 young children whose mother abandoned them to find herself. And there were members of the community that supported her in that, saying that they hoped she found whatever made her happy. But no one made her create those 3 children. Not just one, but 3. And once they were there, she did have an obligation to prioritize them, and finding herself should have been delayed. There are some circumstances where being, quote, judgy as a society is a net positive, and a refusal to ever be judgy is a net negative for the most vulnerable members of our species, our children. Surely we can strike a balance. We don't need to shame single parents and thus cause people to stay in abusive relationships, and we definitely shouldn't be stigmatizing the single parent who is the one actually sacrificing and taking care of the kids, while at the same time we can have a consensus that aiming for a 2-parent household is the goal because of its positive outcomes, as in, don't deliberately or trivially decide to do this alone. We have to advocate for our kids more and ourselves less. Society has become much more self-centered, and that's fine. No one is forcing anyone to have children. But if someone wants to lead a self-focused life, then a child is not a fashion accessory. And parenthood is probably not a good fit for them. Media messaging on this does matter. Celebrity endorsements do matter, as much as I hate that. I wish they didn't matter to anyone, but they do. As a society, encouraging fathers to have a tea party with their little girl or throw a ball with their son is a good thing. We know that messaging has an effect because teen births are down 70% from where they were in the 90s, which makes it all the more shocking that non-marital births are up. Because in previous decades, most births outside of marriage were due to teen pregnancies. That is no longer the case. Teen births were dropping by about 2.5% each year, and then one year they dropped 7.5%. There were no changes in sex ed or the availability of contraceptives during that year to account for this change. But that was the year that MTV aired 16 and Pregnant. The concern had been that this show would glamorize teen motherhood. The data showed that in locations where people watched more MTV than average, 9 months after the show started airing, teen pregnancy rates fell. The Google data confirmed this. Whenever an episode aired, there would be a spike in searches regarding birth control and tweets mentioning birth control. So, when teenagers could see with their own eyes what we had all tried to tell them, that being a parent wasn't cute, it was hard, and meant missing out, that the girl gained weight and her boyfriend probably wasn't going to stay with her long term, the teen birth rates dropped. So what would happen if the same messaging was applied toward how hard it was to be a single parent? You can see messaging effects on what are considered the social norms if you look at Brazil. When certain soap operas that depicted smaller families, less marriage, and more divorces began airing in parts of Brazil where they had not aired before, they saw changes in the family statistics in those regions that reflected what was shown in the popular soap operas. We're not talking about shaming people. We're just talking about making it the socially accepted norm that making the decision to have a child is something you do when you're in a situation where you can be relatively sure that the child will be raised in a 2-parent home. Obviously, accidents happen and people are left widowed, etc. But once again, we're not talking about shaming. We're just talking about making it the norm that having children is not something you do outside of a very stable, long-term relationship where you are prepared to plan to live with that person as your child grows up. There may also be programs that the government can create, like the ones in Hungary, where married parents get an income tax break per child. Which brings us to the next facet. Cohabitation is not as stable of a home, statistically, as marriage. At least not in the USA. Even among couples who plan to stay together and cohabitate when deciding to have a child, they have a much lower chance of actually staying together than married couples do. These are just what the stats show us. I don't know why that would be true. I just know that it is. Then you have the other end of the extreme, the trending dink lifestyle, meaning dual income, no kids. The internet is flooded with videos of people listing the saddest priorities as an argument for not having children by choice. They list things like being able to buy the snacks that they like at Costco, and being able to listen to the music that they like in their car, being able to stay up late, and being able to afford to eat out more often, etc. With the rise in these videos has come the rise in backlash videos calling these people shallow, materialistic, self-centered, and sad. Which I have to say I agree with. But just because these online trendy dinks are sad, doesn't mean that everyone who chooses not to have kids falls into the same category. Many people who choose to be childless still enjoy being around children. Some of them mentor kids. Some of them volunteer with children or with the elderly. Just because you don't have children doesn't mean there isn't a meaningful purpose to your life. If your life revolves around the snacks you buy at Costco, that may mean that you don't have a meaningful purpose to your life, but it's still your choice. And obviously, there is a big difference between someone who is childless and wants to be a parent but is unable to, and someone who is child-free by choice. Proponents of the child-free lifestyle choice argue that they've put more thought into not having kids than many people put into having kids. I certainly agree that many people have kids without putting much thought into it. But I also think many people put off having kids without putting much thought into it. People have kids for the wrong reasons all the time. They want someone to love them unconditionally and who will be their lifelong friend. They want someone to take care of them in their old age. They do it to please their family or their partner. They have kids foolishly believing that they can fix a broken relationship or marriage. They have kids to create a mini-me or to try to trap someone into staying in a relationship. Perhaps worst of all, they have kids to merely be a fashion accessory or because they're cute. Likewise, people avoid having children for shallow reasons. They want to always be able to have their own way and never have to consider any other person besides themselves. They think that the world would be a better place if there were fewer human beings on the planet. They don't want to gain weight or have fewer cute clothes and high heels. They want all of their disposable income to be spent on their whims without other considerations. They want to be able to go on living like a 20-year-old forever, partying and drinking. They don't want to have any responsibilities, to be responsible for anyone else or to anyone else. And some people don't have kids because they can't plan for absolutely every single eventuality. If their child should want to be a doctor right now, they don't know how they would pay for that 2 decades into the future. Some people are paralyzed by decisions, despite the fact that none of us can ever know absolutely every possibility and have a plan for each and every potential path that our life may go down. On the other hand, some people use that extreme as an excuse to go through life on the other end of the extreme without any plans or thoughts, or even in spite of already present obstacles. This is one issue that I really don't understand the controversy surrounding it. If you are someone who doesn't want to have children, then I don't want you to have children. Not only for you, so you will be happy, but also, even mostly, for the child who would not have a very good childhood with a parent who resents them. If you are someone who does want to have children, then I hope you are able to have them and raise them well. And I hope you really think about the timing and circumstances that you choose to bring them into this world. Divorce courts are an ugly place for kids. I understand very well the urgent desire to have a child and the deep, heartbreaking need it creates. But if you're not sure if you want to be with this particular guy for the next 2 decades, then I would suggest that you are not ready to have that baby with him, however much you may want a baby. And if you're thinking, well, if it doesn't work out, I'll just raise it alone, you should continue that thought into what that life will be like for that child. You will probably be in court to decide custody arrangements. Even if they agree to stay out of the child's life from the start, they can show up and renege on that agreement at any time, turning your child's world upside down. Your child will likely be put through being shuffled from one house to another and exposed to the dating partners of both parents who might abuse them. They will still be exposed to all of the lack of privileges of growing up in a 2-parent household. They will grow up poorer than they otherwise would. They will be more at risk for using drugs and getting involved in crime. They will be less likely to go to college or get married and live in the same home with the children they produce, your grandchildren. At the very least, each parent should be able to say, even if something later comes up that proves them wrong, that when they decided to have a child, it was under the considered belief that they will be staying with that child's other partner for the next 18 years. That should be a minimal starting point for a responsible, unselfish decision. Things happen, but if you can't even say that is the plan and likely future, even at the beginning of this journey, then that should tell you something. To drive this point home, I'm going to share a little bit of the horror stories that have happened to children who have wound up in family court. In 1960, at the height of the baby boom, only 5% of children were born to unwed parents. 2 decades later, by 1980, that number had nearly quadrupled to 18%. By 2016, it had more than doubled again, and at least 40% of children were born to unwed parents. From 1 child out of 20 to 2 out of every 5. According to the CDC in 2021, there were 689,308 divorces in the United States. Many of these divorced and unwed parents will end up in family court where he said, she said arguments will degenerate into a battle with the children being used as the rope in a tug-of-war. On September 29th, 2023, a mother in a custody battle allegedly drowned her 3 children in a murder-suicide after telling the neighbors that if anything happened, they should suspect her husband. On October 20th, 2023, a divorced father allegedly set his home on fire, killing his 3 children while their mother was at work. On December 30th, 2023, a Colorado mom, days away from losing custody of her kids after a custody battle that had drug on for years, and only 2 weeks after a domestic abuse 911 call, she killed their 2 children. And these stories aren't as rare as we would like to think. Every 6 days, a child dies amid custody battles and family court lapses. 984 children have been killed since 2008 by a parental figure in the United States. Family courts have a bad record for missing or even ignoring signs of severe trouble. They often prioritize the parent's rights to visitation over the child, even in cases where there is evidence or suspicion of abuse. Every year, 58,000 children are sent to their abusers for visitation rights by the court system. And 47% of custody evaluators still recommend unsupervised visitation even after reports of family violence. These could be your kids. In 2020, 588,299 children were victims of abuse or neglect in the United States. Well over 500,000. In 2019, more than 672,000 kids spent some time in foster care. We know that about 1/3 of the children in foster care are abused while they are there. To say that our system is failing these children is an understatement. Parents can become so enraged at each other that they make false allegations of abuse against the other or even kidnap their children. One father says he spent well over $700,000 and more than 3 years fighting for his children. Another father says that the fact that judges have immunity for their decisions only allows for corruption and blatant disregard to get even further out of hand. Michigan Circuit Court Judge Rosemarie Aquilina, who hears family and criminal court cases after being a family law attorney for 20 years, says that many judges are put on the bench of family court without having any experience with family law. This puts them at a major disadvantage when it comes to spotting red flags and protecting children. Dr. Charles Sophie, a triple board certified psychiatrist who now works as a member of Dr. Phil's Blue Ribbon Advisory Board after being the medical director of the Los Angeles County Department of Child and Family Services, helped create a system in Los Angeles that was responsible for evaluating both parents in order to discover if either was fit to have custody. A mental health expert and a physical expert who were trained in spotting the signs meets with the children to look for signs of abuse and report to the judge. But it is not uncommon for the judge to ignore what these experts discover out of sympathy to the stressed and tearful parents. The judges allow their sympathy for the parents to outweigh their sympathy for the child. They give the parent a second chance, even though that chance may be the last one that a child has, and could cost them their life. About half the time, even when abuse has been established, the parent receives some sort of custody or unsupervised visitation. Many other states can't afford the experts in the first place, and neither can the parents. Often, judges don't believe the children because of their age or other factors. 22-year-old RJ told Dr. Phil that he and his siblings were the rope in their parents' tug-of-war for more than 15 years, and that the family courts just made it worse. Quote, "My two protectors should have been my mom and dad, but they were both fighting in family court, so I was caught in the middle of it with my siblings. We were on our own. Me and my siblings definitely felt helpless. We felt like we had no power." RJ says that his father emptied the joint bank accounts and left him and his mother homeless for a time, and that his father hated his mother so much that he weaponized the family courts as a way to drag out punishment, even having her jailed for 58 days at one point when the children refused to go home with him. He was given custody of RJ for 5 years. When RJ would express his desire to live with his mother, his father would tell him that he would rather have him put in foster care. He physically and verbally abused the children and was an alcoholic, according to RJ. There were nights that he was so drunk that he didn't recognize his children, and other nights when he completely passed out. DCF was involved multiple times and eventually did confirm neglect. But this did not change the outcome in the family court. Eventually, RJ ran away to live with his mom when he was 14, and his siblings had never forgiven him for leaving them behind. Repetitive and consistent returns to the court, relentless litigation, the court being used to chronicle their post-dissolution functioning as a family, where both parents were brimming with poor judgment, became these kids' world. They didn't let any of the small stuff go, and the court was used to referee every disagreement down to bickering over the children's diet and Little League schedules. Quote, "I wanted them to have a great life, but fighting with her father was more detrimental than missing Little League, RJ's mother now sees. RJ says that his dad used him to punish his mom and repeatedly told him that he hated RJ's mother. He says that the professionals kept making false promises to him that the kids would get a say in the arrangements by this age and that age, but never kept those promises, which is what led him in sheer desperation to take things into his own hands after a physical fight with his father where the police became involved. That was when he ran away. Jason also had a sad story. He had to fight for his daughter for 8 years, but he was determined to save his child. His ex had a problem with drugs, but he says his concerns were dismissed and the court's default position was to treat him like a deadbeat dad. His daughter was locked in a basement for 14 hours at a time, and he couldn't stop it. His fears were confirmed when he saw bruising on his daughter that was clearly made by someone's hand. This began to happen regularly, and eventually her hand was slammed in a door. All 5 digits were lacerated, a knuckle was fractured, and 2 fingers were jammed. After this, he was given primary custody. Judge Aquilina advised him as he sobbed that when it came to orders from the court that he didn't want to follow, that, quote, no matter what the court orders, the court doesn't always get it right. You have to follow the orders, and the court will eventually see that you are the fit parent and the custodial parent. But it's going to take some time. Even after Jason got primary custody, his ex continued to get visitation rights, and he would have to drop his daughter off into dangerous situations, including the various new boyfriends her mother was involved with. The stats tell us that the likelihood of a child being sexually abused by a non-biological cohabitating male is 20 times higher than normal. The likelihood of physical abuse for a child when a non-biological male is living in the home is 33 times higher than normal. The likelihood of one of these children being killed by a non-biological male is 100 times higher than normal. And Jason's fears were not unfounded, as his daughter's mother was eventually murdered after sending a final text message on August 11th, 2020 at 10:44 a.m. Quote, please tell my daughter I love her. It had been a year since she had last seen her mother when Jason had to break the news to his daughter at school. Lonnie Combs, a prosecutor who now works for Dr. Phil's new media outlet, says that even with the crazy things that happen to her in criminal court, crazier things happen in the family courts because parents are so emotionally volatile and unstable during these high-pressure times. Quote, you can divide a bank account, but you can't divide a child. Children shouldn't be forced to become involved in adult issues. Quote, you need to love your child more than you hate your ex. And you don't want to end up in a situation where you have to invite the government to play referee in your personal life or family. It's not a popularity contest. If you think that your partner would never do these things, all I can say is that the people in these horror stories probably thought the same thing at one point. I'm not saying don't have kids. All I'm saying is think about how and who you're having them with before you decide to indulge the desire to have them. Quote, you can't divorce your children. You may divorce their other parent, but you will both be their parents forever. There are bells that you can't unring. That includes having a child, who you have that child with, and deciding to get involved in the courts over disagreements or out of wanting to get payback on someone you're angry with. Most parents love their children more than their life. All I'm saying is, before having that child that you already love, are you willing to love them more than yourself, even when it's unbelievably hard? Or even when it means waiting to have them until you can reasonably offer them a better life. I thank you for listening. I hope you've found it interesting. And I hope you know I'm coming from a good place when I bring these subjects up. It's out of genuine concern. It's not out of judgment for anyone. It's out of let's talk about these things and stop and think about all the different facets of them. So I hope you are someone who enjoys having those conversations too, and that you will come back next week. In the meantime, have a good week.